Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on digitisation in estate planning. My name's Dave Newick. I'm the Managing Director of Arken.legal, and I'm going to be presenting the webinar to you today. Now, if you're somebody who's been in a webinar with us before, one of our customers perhaps, then a warm welcome back to you. If you are a new participant, then again, a warm welcome to you as well. A couple of bits of housekeeping, and that is that in the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a panel, and we actively encourage you to get involved in the webinar. We've got the chat function there, which you can ask questions. So please do that, and we're going to leave some time at the end, providing I don't chat for longer than the allotted 60 minutes. Now in the background there, we've got Jessica Furbank. So good morning to you, Jessica.
Good morning, everyone.
Jessica is our customer success manager and helps with any of our existing customers, and certainly in as far as the digitisation process is concerned, is well worth speaking to if you're thinking about some of the things that you're trying to do in your business and your business process, how some of our product suite may be able to assist you. Now, a couple of other housekeeping things, and that is that we are broadcasting from home. We're still remote working, so if you hear dogs barking, trucks pulling up outside, then excuse me, I'm on the 3rd floor of a townhouse, so the window is open because it's a lovely hot day here in the UK, so I hope you're all enjoying that as well. Now let's have a look at what we're going to talk about today. So essentially we've got a couple of things which we want to refer to. I'll just go through those now. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the what, which is digitisation and why it matters. So I'm not going to spend too long on that, but look, I think it's important that we do understand actually what digitisation is, because to many different businesses and different practices, it can mean different things. Obviously, if you're a very large commercial enterprise, then digitisation can involve millions and millions and millions of pounds and all sorts of different business practices. And this webinar really is not about that. This is about a digitisation webinar for estate planning practitioners of all sorts of different sizes. And in this webinar, we've got a range of different practices of different sizes, and they'll have their own complexities and their own challenges. Then we'll move on to the show me the money bit. You might have seen that movie, and we'll talk a little bit about the business case there. Now, I'm not going to present to you a business case. We've got a wide divergence of participants in the webinar today, so I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is to give you the recipe for you to consider your own business case within your own practice there. And then we'll get to the meat of the sandwich, which is the key actions. So how you can advance and start your digital journey. And in that section, we've got some easy start points for you, some things to consider and to think about, some key success metrics, and then we're going to go on to some of the more detailed and perhaps next phase digitisation pieces. So at no stage throughout the webinar today am I going to talk about artificial intelligence or blockchain or any of these other kind of technologies that I've talked about before. This is really all about practical assistance to help you get started with your digitisation journey. And of course, at the end there, we've got a summary, and those of you who have been in a webinar with me before will know that I do love a good Winston Churchill quote, and I'm not going to disappoint you. There is certainly a Winston Churchill quote or two towards the end of the summary. Now, throughout the webinar today, we're going to have a couple of polls, and in fact, there's a couple of polls that I'm going to ask you quite quickly just to help me understand where you're at with a couple of things. And then at the end also, there's a poll, and we're just going to ask you, we're going to start doing this in all of our webinars, how valuable this has been to you. So please be completely honest, we spent a lot of time putting together these webinars because we want to try and help people. So it would be really great if you could just help us by telling us, yes, it was valuable, no, it wasn't. Maybe you could do some different things there. And the last thing I'll say to you is that if you hang around right till the bitter end, just before the 60-minute mark, is that I have a special offer for any participants in this webinar. So we'll make the most of the fact that it's a beautiful day and I've had a long weekend. So I'm feeling good and feeling generous. So you could stick around and see that. Now, let's have a look at digitisation and really have a think about actually what are we talking about. So digitisation, the formal description of it here is that it is the integration of digital technologies into your business processes and IT infrastructure. So the key there is digital technologies. Now, obviously, one of the best examples of that is Arken and the full product suite that we have there. The rule drafting software, the fact find software, the online rule systems, all these different things that we have in our product suite. But of course, today's session is not about just Arken. It's about digitisation, and that of course involves all sorts of different technologies, and we're going to attempt to cover in a short period of time the way in which you can work all the way through your business process and start to incorporate some of the different digital technologies at different phases. And of course, we're going to talk to the business process piece of this description here, and a little about the IT infrastructure, but most of what we're going to talk about today is in fact about the business process. So it's really important, isn't it, when we start to think about digitisation, that we start to think about why you'd bother. But the first thing we're going to do is to just think about digitisation as it sits within your practice now. So if we think about the influence perhaps that COVID-19, this whole pandemic, the lockdown and remote working has had on your practice, I wonder if you might just indulge me by answering some questions in this poll that Jess is going to put up now. So I'll just give you a moment or two to answer that. And that's really about whether the COVID pandemic has changed the views of digitisation within your practice. Right, well, I think we've probably left that open for long enough now. Jess, how do we go with the responses? Let's straight them to the participants.
So 100% agree there, Dave.
Okay, great. Look, I can't actually see those results, so I don't know what they are, but if you could just read them out for me, Jess, that would be fantastic.
Yep, so all of the others were 0%, so strongly agree was 0%, disagree was 0%, strongly disagree was 0%, and agree was answered 100%.
Wow, okay, yeah, fantastic. Look, that is no surprise to me. I think that what we've seen within the Arken business is that certainly when lockdown was announced, partly because of some of the things that we've been doing and some products that we've released and things as well, but generally people that we've been speaking to suddenly started to address some of the decisions that they needed to make in their business so that they could enable remote working and so that they could start to think about how they could perhaps reconsider their business process and all these other things that go into digitisation. But what that is really pleasing, I guess, that certainly it's a unanimous result amongst all of the participants that we have here today. But let's just have a think about some of the why. Now, this is actually a slide that I took from a previous webinar that I did on digitisation back in 2018, and it still stands up today, but the flavour is slightly different, and we'll start to think about the impact of COVID in the next slide. But if we just look at this, you'll see that a lot of these drivers are still very true today. We want to get efficiency gains, absolutely. Grow revenues, well, we're certainly looking at a different time. As I say, we're going to explore that a little bit more in the next slide. But back in 2018, digitisation was certainly something that you want to do to enable the growth of revenues and to be able to gain scale. And we're going to talk about scale a lot today. Don't fear, if you're a one-off sole trader, then this is still very relevant to you. We're certainly going to talk about increased customer acquisition, although this is not a sales or a marketing webinar. But back in 2018, digitisation was a large part of the value of that was to start to improve your customer acquisition. And of course, then looking at customer loyalty as well. If you're a law firm, then that today is still very important, particularly if you're a practice that has a significant bull bank. That might be where you get the majority of your business from. So a lot of digitisation is about taking all of these things and saying, okay, well, we want to make this better, and we want to improve on each of these little points here. Now, the last one, of course, is about data. So improving the ease of access to information to speed decisions. And again, we're going to refer to that a lot. And that very much stands up both from 2018 and as a driver all the way through, regardless of economic conditions that we might be confronting in the next little while. And the reason for that is simple, is that you need to understand your business. And a way to do that is through digitisation. So if we look now at the next poll, what we're just going to think about is where your practice is at. So if you could just take a moment to tell us where you're at in your digitisation journey, that'd be great. Okay, how have we gone there, Jess?
I'm just going to give it a few more seconds, just getting a few more in. Okay, I'm going to close it now. Okay, so we had 14% say fully digitized in the cloud. We had 40% saying partly digitized ongoing development. 14% have a few systems that aren't integrated. 0% say started but not very far along, and 29% saying not started.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, that gives me a great indication of where people are at. And can I just say that it's really pleasing that people are at the top end of that scale, because when we ran this webinar and did the same poll back in 2018, we had nobody at that level. And I think if you looked at the recent poll, the IRN Research Wills, Probate and Trusts survey, then they were very clear that they saw digitisation starting to really take place in the industry. I think they were mostly referring to B2C impacts, but I think you can take that as a comment that generally there's been more digitisation that's adapted as well. Now, for those participants who are at a different phase in your digital journey, there's a lot in this for you, and I'm really pleased that you're here with us today, because getting started is honestly the most difficult thing to do. Where do you start? How do you get going? What is the pathway that you need to follow? And I think you'll get a lot out of today. So let's just have a think about where we're at right now. Now, clearly the pandemic, the whole kind of C word that has had a massive impact. And if we start thinking about digitisation, then the time is now right for us to start thinking about advancing and speeding up why and when we would digitise. And some of the reasons for that are that we expect that things are going to get tougher, we expect that things are going to get tighter, and therefore things like cost efficiency are going to become all the more important. Now, if we start to consider other aspects of that, perhaps if we get into a tighter market, which we're confronting less consumer discretionary income, I think that's going to be reasonably widespread. I'm not an economist, but everything I read tells me that that's going to be the case because of the number of redundancies and things like that. Then I think that we can expect that we'll see that start to flow through to estate planning. And then the next phase on from that is that we're going to find that the market is tighter. And when things get tighter, then we find ourselves under price pressure. We find ourselves in a situation where we're having to fight harder to secure customers. And I use that description deliberately because I'm not just talking about acquiring customers, I'm talking about actually keeping the customers that you've got at the moment. So everything starts to change because these things have their own market forces. And if we start to think about the value of digitisation, then the time very much is right to start things now, rather than perhaps in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, when we're really perhaps under more operational, perhaps even some financial pressure. So better to start to identify how and where you can start to digitise and find these efficiencies that you're going to need. Now, if we move on, then I think one of the things that's come out of the pandemic has been that the staff have changed, haven't they? We've all changed, I guess, a little, and our expectations have changed a little. We're probably all very good at making sourdough and things like that now, but if we start to think again about the return to work and some of the changes that may well happen, if you're a firm that perhaps isn't as digitised as others, then that changed mindset, those changed expectations may well then start to flow through when you've got firms and organisations perhaps who are digitised, who can, through their digitisation, enable more agility, enable more work flexibility. Perhaps they can work 4 days a week with 3 days of those being at home. Perhaps they're quicker to the customer. Perhaps they're able to be equally or perhaps more profitable at a lower price point. Perhaps they're able to deliver a superior customer service. Perhaps they're able to reach new customer groups simply because they're able to speed up things and to introduce new services very, very quickly. Perhaps also that there's going to be some pressure in terms of staff who come back to work and look at other opportunities that are open to them. And I would say that millennials in particular would be very interested to work for firms that have a strong digital presence, because it's one of the ways in which they judge firms. So have a think about some of that, because that to me goes to why we should start thinking about digitisation. The next point here is enable agility, and agility is really multifaceted. It's a great description. We've seen some of the firms who haven't been agile as they've started to have to adopt remote working, and that's been a real struggle for them, and particularly those firms that have perhaps been very dependent and reliant on paper-based systems. This pile goes there and then that goes to somebody else's desk, those sorts of approaches. Then the move to remote working, of course, then completely dislocated that and made it really hard to work from home. So the agility in terms of being able to work and not be reliant on paper in particular, but also the agility as an organisation to ensure that we take the lessons that we've learned from the lockdown that we've been in, just in case it happens again. Now, I pray that that doesn't occur, but there is the chance that we may well end up, perhaps in the winter, when we get out of this lovely warm weather, back in another lockdown. And the key facet then for any organisation between now and then will be the ability for you to be agile and to be able to deploy into work, not just on a sort of survival mode basis, but on a really successful basis where you can ease your way into remote working very, very quickly. The last point here is once again about data. Now, the comment I make about that in terms of COVID is, as related to all the other points, is that it's really important now more than ever to understand your business, because as we start coming under pressure, price pressure, perhaps customer pressure, perhaps there's pressure on costs, there's all sorts of pressures. So we need to understand our businesses much, much better than we ever did before, at a much more granular level than we ever needed to before. And if you look back at perhaps some of the last little while, there's been a reluctance to adapt or adopt other digitisation, and that's probably been because firms haven't particularly needed to. There's been no one real driver to make sure that hey, really we should go and get this done. And I think COVID has probably changed that, and I think that's what you're telling me in the poll. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Now let's have a look at the show me the money piece, the business case, Now, a reminder here that we're going to work our way through giving you the recipe so that you can start to build your own business case. And we're going to give you some ideas and some thoughts around how to get started in the next section. So let's just have a think about this. Now, from a perspective of looking at your practice, one of the great things you can do if we're starting to think about where to get started is to understand where the inefficiencies are, because if you know where your inefficiencies are, you can start to resolve those and start to apply technology and effort into the areas where you're going to get maximum bang for buck. Now, these 4 areas are certainly not exhaustive. They're certainly not areas that will apply to every practice. But what I would say is that these 4 areas here are consistently the things that we're told when we go and talk to our clients that are the biggest inefficiencies, and we see this time and time again. So let's just explore these a little bit more in some detail. Number 1 is data entry. Now, what we're talking about there really is rekeying data. So an example of that would be where you're perhaps a wool writer and you've got consultants, instruction takers out in the field, and they email in, they scan in, they fax in, they post in. We've heard a hard copy of a printed out PDF, and then somebody in the office sits there and keys in that data. And then if you want that data to go to your CRM, then you've got to sit there and key in that data to the CRM as well. Now, as much as 50% of a fee earner's time, or a drafter's time, depending on your business model, can be spent on data entry. And that's a massive amount of time, isn't it, when you think about the cost of the people who are doing that sort of work. So when we're talking to our clients, that's something that we've really, from an Arken perspective, worked very, very hard to try and solve. Now, if you align that with the next point, which is low-level tasks, an example of that would be where perhaps you aren't with Arken, perhaps you're using another system, perhaps you're using your own precedents, and they're word-based. So you have highly skilled, expensive, and very experienced practitioners spending time perhaps formatting, numbering, spacing in Word documents simply because you're working with word-based templates. Now, that's a low-level task, and there's many other low-level tasks that go into that category. That's simply an example for you that we see all the time. Another would be printing out paper and writing things out, of course, so doing things on a manual basis, and we're going to talk about that a little later on as well. Now, the next point is where you've got within your business process inefficiencies, and that you are repeating them frequently. So perhaps if we use the previous 2 examples, if we've got data entry being done manually and you're using word-based templates, and you're doing, let's pick a number, 100 wills a month plus all of the other documents, then you're repeating that same inefficiency 100 times. And the issue with that is, of course, twofold. One is obviously you've got a lot of inefficiency there, it's exacerbated. But 2 is that the result of that is that you can't scale, you can't add volume easily to that model. So the only option then, and we see this all the time, is that if you're running a drafting team, the size of the drafting team increases. And as we start to think about the economy going forward, that's probably not something that we want to think about doing. So you need to start thinking about the antithesis of this, which is making sure that your business processes are repeatable and scalable. And you can do that through digitization, you can do that through automation, and there's a whole range of things you can do there. I'm not going to dive into the detail, but what I would ask you to do is to consider your practice, consider your business process, look at the inefficiencies, and then look at how often you're repeating those inefficiencies and the end impact on you, because there is definitely some gains there for you. And aligned with that is when we look at business processes in many practices, and I referred to perhaps the pile of paper a little earlier on, then a lot of the processes are manual. So you have perhaps a document which is printed out right at the start of the process, and then there's different pieces of paper that are added to that. It goes through the various different checking processes, and some of those are going to be on a very hierarchical basis. So complex rules and things need to be checked by a senior member of staff. Now, I'm not knocking any of that. I think that certainly you need to have your quality control, and in the lack of any sort of digital processes, that you will probably resort back to a paper-based system. The question I'm going to ask you is, what is the impact of that, and what is the inefficiency there, and can you afford to have that inefficiency as we start to look at where the market is heading? Even if you're not thinking about it from a cost and efficiency perspective, start thinking about it from a customer experience perspective. An example would be if you had let's say a will, and a will was taking perhaps 2 to 3 weeks to work its way through your process, from the instruction taker to getting something back as an engrossed document back to your client, then what is the impact on that in terms of referrals? What is the impact on that in terms of the customer and the time that it then takes you internally to generate an outcome for them? Do you want to be back further? Can you save perhaps 30% of that time simply by looking at your business process and making it more efficient, adding in some digitization to it, because that's good for the customer? And straight away, to the previous point, you're going to start to add scale without having to add any cost. So the point here is, a good start point for a business case is to look at your inefficiencies, and we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail now. So these, at a high level, are the 5 pieces of a high-level business process. So number 1, customer acquisition, then we go into instruction taking, service delivery, completion, and after sales care. Now, when you look at this, I want you to start to think about whether you know what the unit cost is of delivering a service. And a service can be the complete documents for a particular customer. It could be perhaps the unit cost of delivering a will, or a unit cost of delivering an LPA. And some of the firms who are perhaps quite digitized will know this already, because you may well have done this work to get to a stage of digitizing. But for those practices that are perhaps not at that level, then I'd urge you to start to think about what the unit cost is. Why? Because that will then give you a very good idea as to where you can find the efficiencies through digitization. So let's have a look at this. Now, number 1, customer acquisition. So what we're talking about here really is perhaps an example where you've got a customer with a will bank. You may not spend a lot of time on customer acquisition, but you will spend some, because there's going to be difficulty in old data being in systems, isn't there? You don't have the phone number accurately, you don't have their address, you don't have email addresses, so you've got to try and establish all of those sorts of things, maybe a phone call or whatever. Or perhaps for a different business, you've got a need to acquire a lot more customers, so it's all about the new customers for you. So the question there is, how much time do you spend in that piece? And the measure of that then is to take from the tech world a little metric which we use all the time, which is a CAC, so it's cost of acquisition of a customer. And basically what we do is we take the total marketing cost and the hours spent, all the salaries, and we work out on a per customer basis what our cost of acquisition is. And that's a great stat, because then you understand, actually, well, crikey, it's costing me £2,000, and I need to now know that I've got that customer for the next 10 years. It's not going to be £2,000 for you, of course, but as a loose number. So if we come through then into the unit cost of instruction taking, and I would hazard a guess that this is probably the area where most practices can make some pretty significant gains. But if you're already digitising this area and you've addressed this issue, then you're probably at a stage where you can start to address other areas. But in the instruction taking area, then do start to think about what it is actually costing you to get instructions in the door. And can you do that more efficiently? And I can assure you, you can through using some of the tools that we've got in Arken. But there's also other ways in which you can do that. It may well be that just within your business process that you can speed up instruction taking, and that is a great place to start looking at improving your business. Service delivery, obviously we're talking then there about the point where you've got the instructions, perhaps in the middle there you've already got those instructions confirmed, and you can then go on to delivering the will or the LPAs or whatever it is that you're delivering to them. Have a think about that in terms of again, the total hours spent, including data entry, because I know that that's a cost in that area, and what that means at an hourly rate basis. Can you bring that hourly rate down? And then there's the completion. So I know that one of the problems that we have in the industry is, particularly at the moment, and I really do understand this and I do sympathise around it, is getting wills executed, getting documents executed. But even in the normal world, when we're outside the pandemic without lockdown complexities, then we've still got issues to get wills executed and returned and make sure that obviously they're legally binding. Now, how much time do you spend in that area? What is the unit cost? Again, start to think about the man hours that you're spending in this area, and can you digitize this? Can you automate this through your CRM, through perhaps some web processes? What are some of the other things that you can do to address some easy wins, I would think, in this area? And then, of course, you've got your after-sales care. Now, this might not be such a big area in terms of cost efficiency, but I tend to be of the view that it is of significant benefit when we start to think about the value of upselling, of companion selling, of gaining referrals, and of hitching while the iron's hot, to use that old adage. So what are the efficiencies that you can bring in terms of digitization that will assist you gain more revenue, acquire more customers, ensure that you have a very happy customer? Perhaps that's pushing out a survey on an automated basis which says, can you please rate our service? Crikey, you know, we're running at only 6 out of 10. What have we got to do to improve here? A question on that survey might be, how do we compare to other practitioners that you've used in previous years? Some very interesting stuff that you can do there. So the first point here on the slide is really just to think about the unit cost of delivering a service, because if you can get down to this level of detail, you will start to really understand where to apply your effort and your spend if you are going to spend something on digitization. Now, if we start to think about the other aspects of this, and of course, you know, you can't just kind of look at it at a high level. We need to start thinking about other things like average transaction value, companion sales, monetizing traffic, all these sorts of things. So average transaction value, what is the value of services per customer cohort? A customer cohort for you might be perhaps those customers who are in your will bank, those customers that are new customers. It may be that you have customers who are aged 60 to 80. You may have customers who you are putting into a cohort because they're 20 to 37, so some millennials. Whatever the cohort is, can you map out, do you understand what the average transaction value is for each of those customer sets of data? And of course, that's going to be affected by companion sales. So companion sales is when you go to McDonald's and they say, do you want fries with that? It's a very poor example, but that's exactly what we're doing. Or perhaps a better example would be when you go to a financial services company and they say, well, actually, do you want this insurance as well as your home contents? So the question to ask when you start to think about digitization is, what else does each customer cohort need as an additional service to drive your average transaction value. Now, for many of you, that's going to be something that you do a lot anyway. The point I'm making here is that you need to digitize that if you haven't already, because whilst you won't get everybody, you will still make relatively for free and at relatively low cost an additional and incremental amount of revenue. And certainly if we start to think about the way in which the world may change, then it's going to be really important that if we're going to struggle to make sales, that the average transaction value of each sale is continually rising, rather than perhaps relying purely on business development, because it may well be tougher to secure customers at the price point that you want to pay. Now, loosely, you could argue that companion sales also refers to referrals. So a companion sale, maybe you've just concluded a will for somebody, perhaps a couple who are in their 70s, and you offer them the chance to do a will for their children. So what else can we do for you? Well, great, look, let's run some wills for your children who we know have your grandchildren as well. And moving along, monetizing traffic. So this is a good one from a digitization perspective. I've done a lot of work in this in previous career roles that I've had. Now, what I'm really talking about there is your website. And if we took an example of a firm who perhaps does 100 wills a month, and of that 100 wills, 50 of those wills are done from the will bank. So 50 of them come from the website and other sales channels. But let's just say for simplicity, it comes from the website. Now on your website, you might get 1,000 unique visitors. So that means that you're getting 50 sales off 1,000. So the question I'm asking you is what you can do from a digitization perspective to monetize the other 950. Now you're not going to get them all, but what can you do again from an incremental perspective to really perhaps get another 25? So suddenly you're 50% better off in that regard. A suggestion to you there, absolutely, if you're chasing millennials, or even if you're not, because this applies to increasingly, particularly past COVID, where everyone's got much more used to technology, if you're not using chatbots, then you need to think about doing that. They are brilliant and they will really help you with your customer engagement, but particularly for millennials who want everything now. They want it to be like Amazon, right? So you need to think about doing that. Scale and repeatability. Actually, look, let's just go back to monetizing traffic. I've got another point to make about that. I was doing some work on our own digital journeys, and a case study was flashed before my eyes about a firm that had changed a single word on their pricing page of their website and got a 90% uplift in sales. A single word. Now, it would be great if we knew what that single word was and whether that was appropriate for everybody. I'm sure there's a lot of work that went into getting that single word right. The point I'm making here is that in our industry, most websites, and I say most, not all, are poor. I've just gone and said it, there you go, they're poor. There is a lot of ground from a digitization perspective that can be made by considering the digital presence. Now, I'm not saying that we're replacing the face-to-face, not at all. What I am saying, though, is that there's an opportunity to improve our digital presence and to do more there to see if we can't gain some of the incremental revenue that we're going to be more reliant on as things go forward. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about scale and repeatability. So the question here is, what level of scale can you achieve, and is it achievable? And just again, what we're looking for there is what can you get out of your existing cost base? So can you keep on adding in volume to it because you're getting ever more efficient? Can you achieve scale? And you need to think obviously about where you think the business is going to be. So what sort of economic conditions will you be battling against, and where will you be placed against those? As an example, you may do 100 wills a month plus some other associated documents. what volume in your most negative thoughts are you forecasting to do? So if you're forecasting to do 80, then how can you make sure that if you're doing 80 wills and other documents, that in fact you're still making the same amount of money, or perhaps you're even growing, because you've got the digitization underway, you've got the efficiencies that you're looking for. Now, strategy, of course, this is an opportunity for all firms to start to think about how we're addressing the market, what our strategy is, the approach that a lot of firms are taking in the last little while is to grow aggressively. Whether that's still the case, I don't know, although I would say that I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for firms who are more advanced in their digital journey. And then you have firms that are perhaps looking to retract, to go backwards a little bit in terms of just bring down the costs and make sure that you can hunker down over the next economic cycle. Or are you looking to just hold where you are? And all these things obviously have a bearing on the business case for digitization. You'll need to bring those things forward when you start to table documents to your partnerships. So with a view towards that, you're going to need to start to measure your success in a business case. So essentially, when you look at the ATV, the average transaction value, how much can you improve this without actually increasing prices? And I should say without increasing costs either. So if you know exactly what your average transaction value is, and you said that right through digitization, I really want to drive that by 20%, because I expect that my volume is going to be lower, as I was saying earlier on. And then associated with that, then what can you drive your average companion sale volume, and of course the value of that is expressed in pounds and pence, level 2 as well. Do you know what your companion sales volume and value is? If you don't, do find out, and then start to work forward so that you can improve that through digitization. Now, the monetizing traffic, I've given you some examples on that before, but how many customers can you onboard without actually spending any more on marketing? So what we're saying is that you're not going to go out there and spend £100,000 putting together a glittering LinkedIn and Facebook campaign, but you may choose to spend 200, and I advise you do consider that, because there's probably some quite cheap buying in that area. But how many customers can you onboard actually just by making things better within your existing spend, within your existing processes? Now, the scale and repeatability question, I'm just going to talk a little bit to multi-office firms, and I know that some of you are on the webinar today. So how repeatable are your processes between offices and teams? Because if you start to think about success for practices like yourselves, then that may well be the area that you're going to get a maximum bang for buck. Because if you've got 8 different offices all using different systems, all using different business processes, then you're going to struggle perhaps to see the benefit of digitization. So the opportunity for you then is through digitization is to get consistency. And that involves obviously taking things into the cloud. It obviously involves mapping out your business processes and doing a whole range of things that we're going to talk about in the next little while. But look, scale and repeatability, I think you need to consider that in a practice of any size. What is the maximum output you can push out, and can you continue to grow that on a very repeated basis? Have a think about what sort of volume and outcome you're looking to achieve, and that obviously goes to the scale piece. And then obviously have a think about measure your strategic success in terms of, well, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to go back and save some pounds? Perhaps if you're not an Arken customer and you were to use our Arken Professional product, and you've suddenly got massive efficiencies, you might choose to use those efficiencies to take a cost efficiency, perhaps lower the cost of your drafting team, and to apply that elsewhere, or perhaps just to provide yourself a little buffer before your cost base and your profitability. Or you might use that capacity to drive some volume in your practice and really start to achieve some scale. Now, I've talked about the what and I've talked about the why, and I really need now to give you the meat in the sandwich, which is the how-to. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, this is what we're going to talk about. Now, Again, this is a simplistic approach to really just getting started. Now, the start point that I would suggest for any practice of any size is to focus on getting some data. Now, I'm not advocating that you go out there and spend £100,000 or a great deal of money on a analytics package, which like a tech firm has a dashboard and it shows you how many customers you've onboarded and how many documents they've done and all those sorts of things. What I am advocating is that every firm has data. And that might be data that's held in a spreadsheet. It may well be that it's held in people's heads. So wherever your firm is at in terms of data acquisition, perhaps the other example is, well, you've got some reporting, but it's not as advanced as it could be, then do start thinking about getting better data or getting data. It can be as simple as sitting down with your teams and working through a business process and getting an idea from them subjectively how much time it would take, what is the unit cost behind those phases that we were talking about before, where the inefficiencies are, and what do we need to address to make the practice more efficient and more digitized. And of course, you're going to need to analyze the results. And I'm not again advocating that you spend thousands of pounds on an analytics package. You don't need to do that, but you will need to take that data and you will need to start to consider actually, well, what does that mean for our practice, and start to extrapolate that out in terms of some of your budgeting and forecasting. Maybe sit with your accountant and say, wow, we need to think about the time ahead. This is the raw data in terms of the efficiency of the practice. We think if we can get a 20% gain, then we're going to be able to produce this much volume, or we're going to be at a lower cost, or whatever your strategy might be. So do spend some time analysing results, and from that, from a digitisation perspective, again, you'll know where to start. And my advice to you in terms of starting is to start with the quick wins. So start with the low-hanging fruit, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, they exist. Second of all, it's a confidence booster. Third, if you're in a large practice, well, a lot of practices historically have been pretty conservative and pretty resistant to change. That might have changed, I think, after COVID, but there has been this kind of reluctance. And so if you're struggling to get digitisation across the line at your partnership table or within your executive, then quick wins certainly help, don't they? So it's always good to get those in place and to be able to point to some cost savings or some increased revenue coming as a result. And the next thing I'm going to say from a roadmap perspective is commit to a plan. Now, the advice I give you there is that everyone's busy, everyone has operational pressures, and perhaps more so now, and perhaps more so in the future. But it's really important that you do build yourself a plan and you commit to it. And it may well be that your plan is simply to commit 10 hours a month on digitisation and to work that out over 24 months or 36 months, so that you know that you've got this constant, consistent input to digitising your practice. It may well be that you have some spend, that you've found some spend through your efficiencies, and you're going to choose to speed things up within your practice in terms of digitisation, because actually you're not increasing your total cost base. So I suggest that you do think about that. But the key point here is to commit to it, and the next point is keep going. Winston Churchill once said, if you're going through hell, keep going. Now, I'd hate to think that digitisation would be going through hell, but there are aspects of it being difficult and challenging, particularly because sometimes it's new to us, and particularly because we've got difficult decision-making landscapes in which we've got to try and push things through, and it can require a lot of energy. And in times gone by, there has been perhaps not the massive driver, but that might now be changing. And so it's really important that you make a start, and then once you've made that start, that it's sustainable, that you're not going into this boom and bust approach where, wow, we're going to get this all done within the next month, and of course come under massive operational pressure. You're putting yourself under too much pressure to get too much done, and of course it then gets put off onto the back burner. It doesn't surface again for 6 months. Now the problem with that is that firms who are applying a plan and are committed and are keeping on with their digitisation journey are going to be further ahead of you. In 6 months' time, a year's time, when you've perhaps picked up your digitisation journey, you're going to be further back than some of your competitors, and you don't want to be there, because those competitors can apply price pressure. They can start to acquire customers, they can start to chase market share, and you'll be playing catch up. So you don't really want to be in that position. Now here's some free or low cost start points. So if you wouldn't or don't want to go through a process of establishing the unit cost at every single piece of the journey, as I previously outlined, then I'd suggest that you could take a very simple approach and say, okay, how many units do we deliver and what is our total cost, and just work that out. And you might already have that as a key stat in your practice, and that would be fantastic. But if you don't, then you just need to work that through and then to start working back from that point in terms of, okay, well, what could it be? Is there gains here? What would the business look like if we were to get 30% more business coming through? This is the whole scale piece again, but a start point is that, because that's an easy one. Now, how to think about the decision-making processes, and I've referred to that a lot. I spoke about it at the British Rules and Probated Wars for those of you that were there, and that has consistently been one of the struggles for most practices. And I think that COVID has probably changed some of our decision-making processes. We've had to speed up and we've had to become more agile, but there will still be the aspect of decision-making being the aspect or the element which will slow down digitisation. So you can't really embark on digitisation unless you get some degree of buy-in, unless you work out how you're going to make your decisions and make sure that that is on a process that is agreed and that you can push on and get things done. Do think about your existing data. I made this point earlier on, I'm just going to make it again, and that is that every business has data, and leverage that. It will give you a great deal of understanding, and it might actually be quite surprising for you. From that, when you start to look at your digitisation, you'll then understand your priorities, of course, but actually all of the interrelationships between all of that data will then become very clear with you as well. You'll understand the levers inside your business. So as we go into volatility, as we go into times of change, you will know your business inside and out at an intricate level, and you'll know how to manage that using the levers, and that's all driven out of data. Now, mapping out your business processes and data flow, again, I'm not advocating that you hire a business analyst and spend £10,000 mapping things out. What I'm saying is a really free and easy standpoint is getting on a whiteboard or getting on a big piece of paper and mapping out step by step the processes that you have in your business now. And you could, underneath that, then start to capture the data flow. So, okay, which data do we acquire here, and where does that go, and how do we get it there? And underneath that, if you want to go to this degree of detail, you can start to time and establish the cost of the business process at each individual phase. It's a really easy one. Anybody can do it. If you don't know how to do it, if there's stuff that you want to talk to us about, then the next point is, look, just give us a call. We're very used to talking about business process, and the team is fantastic about that. So we're very open and happy to look at your business process. One thing I would say about business process is that I've spoken to many, let's just say many, more than 100, possibly many more than that, firms about their business process, and I've from time to time asked them for a copy of their business process, and not one of them has, in fact, supplied me one. So I don't think on the strength of that the business processes have been paid much attention to on the whole, all the way through practices. And what that says again to me is that then gives you, if you were to do this, competitive advantage, because you're going to understand your business a lot more. You're going to understand how to start addressing some of the inefficiencies. I'm running short of time. I've been expanding on points too much, but look, this is really important, so I am going to spend a little bit of time on this. So some of the next stage developments, or depending on where you're at in your journey, you might already be here, but do consider all your core systems. So you need to know that what you've got in your practice is efficient. Can you scale that within the existing platform, and is it seamless? And what I mean by that is that does it integrate with other parts of your tech stack? So can you transition data from one to the other without having to touch that manually? And look, a little segue here, I've said secure, and that to me is really, really critical, because as we start to look at the impact of economic conditions as we push forward, then you need to be absolutely certain that the organization that you are dealing with has your best interest at heart, and that they are not cutting corners with security, that they are not cutting corners with hosting and where your data is being hosted, that they're not cutting corners by not doing penetration tests. And if you're not one of our customers and you don't know the answers to those questions, then you need to ask your existing provider, because as we go forward, that is going to become really important. And frankly, from a digitization perspective, you can't base your digitization journey on a platform that is not secure. So I urge you, consider that. Now, you need to invest in solutions which actually solve your problem. That sounds very trite, doesn't it? But in fact, that's absolutely the case, because there are solutions out there, and I think we'll see this more in future, where they don't actually solve the problem. And you need to be really aware of what your problems actually are, rather than going out there and buying a piece of technology because somebody says it's a great idea, right? So be aware of what problem you are actually trying to solve, and invest in solutions which are specialized. Invest in solutions which are not generalized generic solutions, that they are proven, that they are people who have been in the market for a long time and who understand the unique business processes, the unique drivers and levers within the estate planning industry. Now, the next one is about mapping out pathways to customer groups. Now, I've said in there desired customer groups, and it may well be that they are within your existing customer base. But do you understand, in fact, how your business process works to get to those customers? Can you understand, or do you have mapped out what the pathways are to new customer groups? Because you need to start thinking about that, and you need to start thinking about how you can do that on a digital basis, again, to drive that incremental revenue that's going to be really important to you going forward. Really important, of course, because it's virtually passive revenue. Now think about the seamless data transfer. If we think about the cost of the 50% that we were referring to before of rekeying information, how are you going to get not just that data into a system initially from the instruction taking stage, but also to get that transition through to CRM. We've got some news coming out in the next couple of weeks in and around that, so watch this space. Now, here's a suggestion for you, and you might roll your eyes at this, but just hear me out. Hear me out, I should say. I suggest to you that a great start point, if you're looking for a way to get going in digitalization, is to actually invest in online wills, because it's low cost, and the likelihood of a high return is actually very high. And most importantly, and this is the most important point that I want to tease out of this, is that it is a great way to learn. So you can start there, and you can really start, if you don't know your way around marketing, social media, some of these other things, is you can give that a go. Now, one thing I can say to you for sure is that if you buy online wills and have it sitting as a link on your website and don't advertise it, it's not going to make you £2,000 a month. That is absolutely for certain. But if you do work it proactively, and people are doing this, and that's why we're seeing some of this digital disruption in the industry, then it is a highly successful way, particularly to get passive revenue with other groups. I gave you the example of the grandparents that wanted to provide something as a companion sale for their children. Online wills is absolutely perfect for that. Now, the other suggestion I'd make in terms of the next stage development is to run a trial. Give it a go. It's okay to make mistakes. It's likely that's going to happen. The key thing is that you're not making £10,000 mistakes. What you're doing is you're learning on the way through. So run a trial for a couple of months. I'm not saying 2 months, oh damn, it didn't work, I'm not doing it anymore. Give it a go for 2 months and then sit back, analyze the results. Okay, what do we learn? What can we do better? Where can we go from here? What's the next level? Hey, that was great, that wasn't so great, so let's not try that again, or maybe we'll try that again with a different approach to it. So look, I hope that that has been of some value to you. There's a little bit whistle stop there. There's a lot of information to cover, but just to try and summarize what I'd really want you to take away today, and that is that the time is now to start thinking about digitization. The world is changing, and it is going to change at a faster and faster pace, particularly in terms of economic conditions. And it's really critical that you start thinking about digitization now, because others will be, and you don't want to be left behind. But in any case, you want to make sure that you are as efficient as you possibly can be. Now, just start, give it a go. You just start small, don't not start. Find your start point in your own practice, and I've given you some ideas of what that might look like. It might be getting your data together, it might be mapping out your business process, it might be starting to think about where your inefficiencies might be, and unit costs, and those sorts of things. And definitely through that process, get to know your practice better, understand its levers, understand what you can do to drive efficiencies, to make things better within your business, to make it better prepared for the time that is coming. And even if those economic conditions don't prevail, that you are in a better place, that you're then able to more focus on growth and all of those really positive things. And the next stage is an unashamed plug. Choose the right partner. And if you're already an Arken customer, then you're absolutely in the right place. But you need to start to think as we go forward about the right partner, because frankly, economic conditions may well see changes in the industry, and you want to make sure that your data is secure. You want to make sure that your partner is able to continue to invest in product. You want to make sure that your partner is able to deliver to you solutions that are going to help us through the next little period. So choose wisely. Now, Winston Churchill, I promised you a Winston Churchill quote. Can I just say before I reference this quote, this does look like somebody in the estate planning industry. I'm not going to say who it is, but if you've got any guesses, do email, let me know, because I think it kind of does look like somebody. Anyway, you will all make all kinds of mistakes, but as long as you are generous and true and also fierce, you cannot hurt the world or even seriously distress it. And I thought this quote from Winston was brilliant when we start to think about digitization, because we are going to make some mistakes. But if we're actually true in our intent and committed, and fiercely committed at that, to driving a digitization program, then actually the risk is low and the upside is really, really high. And further to that, again, another brilliant Winston Churchill quote, success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts. And I know that within some practices that it's been difficult to get things started. And now is the time to do that. And hopefully the partners who have perhaps been reluctant in the past are now in a place where they need to address the fundamental changes that need to be made, because existing business processes aren't appropriate anymore. Now that just about concludes our webinar. Now I do have one final poll for you, so if I could ask you to give us a rating of how useful the webinar was. Just again, that would be very useful for us as we put a lot of time into these, and we just want to understand whether they're hitting the mark or not, and whether there's perhaps improvements that we could make in delivery of content or something like that. So Jess, if you could just run that poll for us, that would be brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Hopefully that's enough time now, Jess. Okay, thank you. Look, I won't look at those results now and comment on them, but very quickly before we go, I know I am running over time. Jess, are there any questions at all?
No, Dave, it looks like everything was covered. No questions this side.
Okay, you're a very shy and bashful bunch, aren't you? But look, thank you for your participation. One thing, I did promise you a special offer. Pippa is away on half term, and I know I'm the managing director, but she can be a bit scary sometimes. So I've got a special offer out here while she's away on half term. So use this code, DNDIGWEB. I didn't actually intend that to be quite as appropriate as what it was, but if you can use that to speak to Jessica, her contact details are down below. There is a special offer that we're putting together for anybody who makes a decision on these products in the next 3 or 4, I think it's 5 days in May. Then we'll give you Arken Acquire for £100 per month. So it's usually 150, so that's a 30% reduction in price there for 3 months, and that's just part of our commitment. We just want, if you don't have Acquire, to give things a go and see how that can start to help. And look, if you're not an online rules customer, then it's £100 per month. We've got a special on that anyway. But what I am doing for any webinar participants is to also throw in 20 free documents. So that's actually a 50% reduction, and the 20 free documents just doesn't happen. We just don't usually do that. So, and again, that's just part of my desire to give you an opportunity to have a go and see how you get on. And that is just available for those orders made in the last 5 days of May. So do get in touch with Jessica. Now, these are my details. Do feel free to make contact with me. I don't publish my personal email address because I get hammered by people trying to sell me stuff. But any email you send to that address will definitely find its way through to me. If you've got any questions, if there's anything you'd like to discuss around digitization, please feel free to get in touch. But other than that, thank you once again for your participation. It's been an absolute pleasure. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, which is actually the 3rd business continuity during COVID webinar, which is next Wednesday, 10 o'clock, I believe. So please do log on to that one. The details will be on the web. Now, do I just see your questions popped up there, Jess?
Sorry, Dave, it just says, thanks guys, very helpful.
Oh,
so
great.
not
Thank you
a
so
question.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, well, thank you to whoever made that comment. And on that basis, we're going to say goodbye. So thank you very much, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye.